The thugs cornered a young cashier after the store had closed, but they had no idea that some bikers were still inside, and what happened next left everyone shocked. Sarah wiped down the last counter at the diner, her feet aching from the double shift. The clock showed 11:47 p.m. Three men walked through the door just as she was about to flip the sign to closed. They wore dark hoodies and moved with purpose. Sarah's stomach dropped. Something felt wrong. "We're closing," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The tallest one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We just need a minute." Sarah glanced toward the back corner booth, where four bikers sat nursing their coffee. They'd been there for hours, their leather vests draped over the seats. Relief washed through her. She wasn't alone. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to The Goodness Effect. The three men spread out across the diner. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. One moved toward the register while the other two positioned themselves near the exits. Her manager had warned her about this during training, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. "Listen," the tall one said, pulling out a gun from his waistband. "Empty the register. No alarms. No problems." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the cash drawer. The diner was family-owned, barely making enough to stay open. The owners had 3 kids in college. This money mattered. The bikers hadn't moved. Their backs were to the situation, seemingly oblivious. Sarah wondered if they'd even noticed what was happening. The jukebox played old country music, masking the tension. "Faster," the gunman hissed. One of the other men approached the counter, carrying a bag. "Everything. Credit card receipts too. And your phone." Sarah placed bills in the bag with shaking hands. The third man walked toward the biker's booth. He grabbed a jacket from an empty chair near them. "That's mine," one of the bikers said without turning around. His voice was calm, almost conversational. The thief laughed. "Not anymore." What happened next changed everything. The biker stood up slowly. He was massive, at least 6'5", with arms covered in tattoos. His 3 companions rose with him, forming a wall of lethal and muscle. "Put it back," the biker said. The gunman spun around, pointing his weapon at the bikers. "Sit down, unless you want trouble." "Trouble already found you," another biker replied. "You just don't know it yet." The diner fell silent except for the jukebox. Sarah pressed herself against the wall behind the counter. The standoff stretched for seconds that felt like hours. The thugs exchanged nervous glances. They'd expected an easy robbery, not resistance. "There's 3 of us and 4 of you," the gunman said, trying to sound confident. "But I've got this." He waved the gun. The lead biker smiled. "That's cute. Mike, you want to tell them?" One of the other bikers reached into his vest, slowly. The thugs tensed. What he pulled out made Sarah's eyes widen. Mike held up a badge. "Police. All 4 of us." The color drained from the gunman's face. These weren't ordinary bikers. They were off-duty cops from the county sheriff's department, members of a motorcycle club that raised money for charity. They rode together every Tuesday night, always ending at this diner. "Drop the weapon," Mike commanded, his casual demeanor vanishing. "Now." The gunman's hand wavered. His accomplices looked ready to bolt. The one near the door made a move, and suddenly everything exploded into motion. The lead biker, whose name was Frank, moved faster than Sarah thought possible for someone his size. He crossed the distance in 3 strides, and tackled the gunman before he could fire. The weapon clattered across the floor, sliding under a table. The thug at the door tried to run, but Mike was already there, blocking his exit. The third man grabbed Sarah, pulling her in front of him as a shield. His arm locked around her throat. "Back off or she gets hurt," he shouted. Sarah couldn't breathe properly. She clawed at the arm, cutting off her air. The bikers froze, assessing the situation. Frank had the gunman pinned face down on the floor, knee in his back. Mike stood at the door, preventing escape. The other 2 bikers, whose names Sarah would later learn were Tony and David, spread out strategically. "You're making this worse," Frank said from the floor, his voice steady. "Let her go. Walk out now. Maybe you get lucky with a judge." "I'm not going to jail," the man holding Sarah said. His breath smelled like cheap beer and cigarettes. "Move away from that door." Mike didn't budge. "Can't do that, friend." Sarah felt the man's grip tighten. Black spots danced in her vision. She remembered something from a self-defense class years ago. She stopped struggling, letting her body go limp suddenly. The unexpected weight shift sheet the man off balance. His grip loosened just enough. David lunged forward in that instant, grabbing the thug's arm and twisting. Sarah dropped to the floor, gasping for air. The man screamed as David applied pressure, forcing him down. Tony helped help him with zip ties they'd pulled from somewhere. Within minutes, all three criminals were restrained on the floor. Frank pulled out his phone and called it in. Sarah sat against the counter, shaking uncontrollably now that the danger had passed. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Frank knelt beside Sarah, his weathered face gentle. "You okay?" Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Her throat hurt where the man had grabbed her. She'd have bruises tomorrow. "You did good," Frank said. Stayed calm. That weight drop move was smart thinking. "I thought I was going to die," Sarah whispered. "But you didn't. You survived." Frank helped her to her feet. Those idiots picked the wrong night for this. 2 patrol cars screeched into the parking lot, followed by an ambulance. Uniformed officers rushed in, weapons drawn, then relaxed when they saw the situation was under control. The paramedics checked Sarah's pulse and blood pressure while the 3 criminals were loaded into separate vehicles. A detective arrived 20 minutes later. Sarah gave her statement, her voice hoarse. The detective recorded everything on his phone, asking questions about timing, descriptions, what was said. The bikers provided their accounts corroborating Sarah's version. "They've hit 4 places this month," the detective told Frank. "Same pattern every time. Late night, small establishments, in and out fast. We've been looking for them." "Well, you found them," Frank replied. "Or rather, they found us." The detective turned to Sarah. "You'll need to come down to the station tomorrow, make a formal statement, look at some photos. These guys are likely connected to other robberies. Your testimony will help put them away." Sarah agreed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her drained. Her shift had ended over an hour ago. She just wanted to go home. The diner owner, a man named George, arrived in his pajamas after the detective called him. He looked at the overturned chairs, the gun still lying under a table in an evidence bag, and his young employee with bruises forming on her neck. "I'm so sorry," George said, wrapping Sarah in a hug. "This shouldn't have happened." "It's not your fault," Sarah told him. "George insisted on giving the bikers free meals for life. You saved her, saved my business. I can never repay that." Frank waved him off. "We were just doing our job. Even off duty, we're still cops." "Still," George insisted, "anytime you come in, your money's no good here." The detective finished his paperwork around 2 a.m. The diner would be closed tomorrow for processing as a crime scene, but after that, business as usual. Sarah gathered her things, ready to leave. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the gun pointing at her, felt the arm around her throat. She gave up trying around 6 a.m. and made coffee, sitting at her kitchen table and staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed constantly. News traveled fast in their small town. Friends and family called, texted, wanting to know if she was okay. The local news had picked up the story. "Diner robbery foiled by off-duty officers," ran as the morning headline. At 10 a.m., Sarah drove to the police station. The detective from last night, whose name was Rodriguez, led her to a small interview room. They went through everything again in more detail. Times descriptions, exact words spoken. Rodriguez showed her photos of known associates, asking if she recognized anyone. "These 3 worked alone as far as we can tell," Rodriguez explained. "But they might have a fence. Someone buying the stuff they stole. Anything you remember could help." Sarah studied each photo carefully but shook her head. The men from last night were the only ones she'd seen. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "The gun was stolen from a house robbery 3 months ago. We're running prints, checking their phones, following every lead. These guys are looking at serious time, armed robbery, assault, attempted kidnapping." "Kidnapping?" Sarah's voice cracked. "When he grabbed you, used you as a shield, that qualifies. The DA is throwing everything at them." Rodriguez's expression softened. "You're going to need to testify eventually, probably months from now. Think you can do that?" Sarah thought about George and his family. She thought about the next potential victim if these men walked free. "Yes, I'll testify." The questioning lasted 2 hours. When it finished, Sarah felt wrung out. Rodriguez walked her to the parking lot. "One more thing," he said. "Those bikers, Frank and his crew, they want to make sure you're okay. Asked if they could check in on you." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time since last night. Tell them yes. And thank you. She drove home, but couldn't settle. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Sarah changed clothes and headed to the gym, needing to move, to do something physical. She ran on the treadmill until her legs burned, then hit the weights. The exercise helped clear her mind. 3 days later, Sarah returned to work. George had installed new security cameras and a panic button behind the counter. He'd also hired an evening security guard for closing shifts. Sarah appreciated the changes, but knew they couldn't erase what had happened. The bikers came in that first night back. Frank, Mike, Tony and David settled into their usual corner booth. Other customers stared and whispered. Everyone in town knew the story by now. Sarah brought them coffee, her hands steadier than she expected. On the house, boss's orders. How are you doing? Frank asked quietly. Better. Still jumpy but better. Sarah glanced around the diner. I keep looking at the door, expecting them to walk back in. That's normal, Mike said. Give it time. The brain needs to process trauma. Don't be afraid to talk to someone if it gets too hard. Did you guys always want to be cops? Sarah asked, surprising herself. She'd wondered about them, but never expected to have the chance to ask. Tony laughed. I wanted to be a rock star. Turns out I can't sing. They talked for a few minutes, and Sarah learned their stories. Frank had been on the force for 23 years. Mike was former military before joining the sheriff's department. Tony grew up in a rough road and became a cop to make a difference. David was the youngest, only 5 years on the job. The motorcycle club, Frank explained. It started as a way to decompress. The job can be heavy. Riding helps clear your head. Then we started doing charity rides, raising money for kids' programs. It grew from there. Over the following weeks, Sarah and the bikers developed an easy friendship. They became regulars on her shifts, always in the same booth, always respectful and kind. Other customers started recognizing them too, often buying rounds of coffee or dessert for the men who'd stopped a robbery. The local paper did a feature story about the incident and the motorcycle club's charity work. Donations poured in. The publicity was unexpected, but welcome. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Rodriguez called Sarah every few days with updates. The 3 criminals had prior records. The gunman, whose name was Kyle Brennan, had done time for assault. His accomplices, brothers named Derek and Jason Martinez, had multiple arrests for theft and drug possession. They're taking a plea deal, Rodriguez told Sarah 6 weeks after the incident. 15 years each, no parole for 10. You won't have to testify. Relief flooded through Sarah. She wouldn't have to face them in court, wouldn't have to relive that night in front of strangers. The robbery changed Sarah in ways she didn't expect. She enrolled in self-defense classes, the real kind that taught practical techniques. Twice a week, she learned how to escape holds, strike effectively, protect herself. The confidence it built surprised her. George promoted her to assistant manager 3 months after the incident. You kept your head when it mattered, he told her. That's leadership. I need someone like that. The diner thrived. People came specifically because of the story, wanting to see where it happened, to meet the girl who'd survived and the bikers who'd saved her. George expanded the menu and hired 2 more servers. Business had never been better. Frank and his crew kept coming every Tuesday, but now they brought other members of their motorcycle club. The group grew from 4 to 8 to 12 regular visitors. They were always respectful, always tipped well, and has treated Sarah like family. One Tuesday evening, Frank pulled Sarah aside. We're doing a big charity ride next month, raising money for a women's shelter. Would you want to speak at the kickoff? Share your story. Sarah hesitated. Public speaking terrified her, but she thought about women in situations worse than hers, women who needed help escaping danger. Okay, I'll do it. The charity ride drew over 200 motorcycles. They rode through 3 counties, ending at a fairground where local businesses set up booths. Sarah stood on a small stage, microphone in hand, looking at hundreds of faces. She told her story simply, honestly. About the fear, the helplessness, the moment she thought she might die. About the bikers who'd been there, who'd risked themselves to protect her. About learning to be strong again, to not let fear win. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Women approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of survival. Men thanked her for her courage. The event raised over $50,000 for the shelter. Sarah realized something that day. The robbery had taken something from her, but it had also given her something back. Purpose, strength, the understanding of what mattered. She started volunteering at the women's shelter, teaching self-defense basics. The classes grew popular, eventually expanding to multiple sessions per week. Sarah found fulfillment in helping others learn to protect themselves. A year after the robbery, Sarah sat in the same diner, same counter, same shift. But everything was different. She was different. The three criminals were serving their sentences in state prison. Rodriguez had told her they'd likely never be released early. Their crime history was too extensive, their actions too violent. The diner had become a local landmark of sorts. Tour guides mentioned it when showing visitors around town. George had framed newspaper articles on the wall, turning the incident into part of the establishment's history. Frank and his motorcycle club had adopted the diner as their official meeting place. Every Tuesday, without fail, they gathered in the corner booth. More importantly, they'd adopted Sarah as one of their own. She'd been invited to ride with them, attended their family's barbecues, become part of their extended community. Sarah had started college too, taking online classes in criminal justice. She wanted to understand the system better, maybe work with victims someday. The bikers had inspired her. They'd shown her that one person could make a difference, that being in the right place at the right time could change lives. On this particular Tuesday evening, a young couple entered the diner nervously. Sarah recognized the look. New to town, not sure where to go, she smiled and seated them near the window. As she poured their coffee, she noticed someone outside watching the diner. A man in a dark hoodie, checking his phone, looking around. Sarah's instincts fired. She walked calmly to the corner booth. "Frank," she said quietly. "Guy outside in a hoodie. Been there 10 minutes. Something feels off." Frank glanced toward the window without turning his head. Obviously, Mike and David shifted positions subtly. Tony pulled out his phone. "Good eye," Frank said. "We'll keep watch." The man outside eventually walked away. Probably nothing, maybe something. Sarah would never know for sure, but she'd learned to trust her instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong. Later that night, as Sarah cleaned up after closing, George approached her. "Got something for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a deed, not to the whole diner, but to a percentage. George had made her a part owner. "You've earned it," George said simply. "You've brought this place back to life. Made it more than just a diner, made it mean something." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. This place where she'd nearly died had become her second home. These people who'd saved her had become her family. Frank and the other bikers waited outside to escort her to her car, as they did every closing shift now, not because they thought she needed protection, but because that's what family did. They looked out for each other. As Sarah drove home that night, she thought about the person she'd been a year ago. Scared, uncertain, just trying to survive, and the person she was now, stronger, purposeful, part of something bigger than herself. The thugs had cornered her that night, thinking she was helpless. They'd been wrong. She hadn't been alone, and she'd never be alone again. The bikers had been there when she needed them most, and in the process, they'd all found something unexpected. They'd found family. Sarah's phone buzzed as she pulled into her apartment complex. A text from Rodriguez. "Need to talk. Can you come by the station tomorrow?" She texted back immediately. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, good news actually. Just want to discuss in person." Sarah barely slept again, but this time from curiosity rather than fear. What could Rodriguez want? The case was closed. The criminals were locked away. She arrived at the station at 9 sharp. Rodriguez met her with a smile, something rare for the usually serious detective. "Come in. Sit down. I have someone who wants to meet you." A woman in her mid-30s entered the room. She had kind eyes but carried herself with visible nervousness. Rodriguez made the introduction. "Sarah, this is Detective Lisa Chen from the State Police. She's been working the task force on organized retail crime. Turns out, your case broke something wide open." Lisa shook Sarah's hand firmly. "The 3 men who robbed your diner. They were part of a much bigger operation. We've been tracking a network of theft rings across 5 states. Your incident gave us a break we needed." Sarah sat down slowly, processing this information. "I don't understand. They seemed like small-time criminals." "That's what we thought too," Lisa explained, pulling out a folder thick with documents. "But once we got into their phones, their finances, we found connections to 18 other robberies. They were feeding stolen goods to a distribution network that moved merchandise across state lines. We're talking millions in stolen property. Rodriguez leaned forward. Because you stayed calm. Because those bikers were there, we caught them red-handed. With that solid arrest, we could pressure them. The younger Martinez brother cracked desk. Started talking, led us to the bigger fish. We've made 23 arrests in the past month, Lisa continued. Shut down 3 warehouse operations. Recovered stolen merchandise worth over $2 million. And it all traces back to that night at the diner. Sarah felt dizzy. She'd thought it was just a random robbery, 3 desperate men making a stupid choice. Instead, she'd been caught in something much larger. There's more, Rodriguez said. The FBI wants to interview you. They're building a federal case. With your testimony about the initial arrest, the chain of evidence stays clean. Everything we found afterward stems from that night. I thought I didn't have to testify, Sarah said quietly. You don't have to, Lisa assured her. This is voluntary, but your statement would help ensure these people stay locked up for a very long time. We're talking about a criminal enterprise that's been operating for 5 years. Sarah thought about the women at the shelter, the self-defense classes she taught, the person she'd become. When do they need me? The FBI interview happened 2 weeks later. Federal agents in dark suits asked questions for 4 hours, recording every detail. They showed her organizational charts, photos of people she'd never seen, explaining how the network operated. The 3 men from the diner were low-level operatives, but their capture had unraveled everything above them. The gunman, Kyle Brennan, had a cousin in middle management of the operation. That cousin kept detailed records, thinking he was untouchable. He was. Word spread through town about the larger investigation. The local paper ran another story, this time about how a small-town diner robbery had exposed a multi-state crime ring. Sarah's phone exploded with interview requests. She declined most of them, but agreed to one with the regional news station. The night the interview aired, Frank and the entire motorcycle club packed into the diner to watch. George had set up a television in the corner. Sarah sat with them, embarrassed by the attention, but grateful for their support. On screen, Sarah talked about that night, about fear and survival, about the bikers who'd saved her. But she also talked about what came after. About finding strength, about helping others, about how a moment could change everything. Those men thought they were robbing a diner, Sarah said to the interviewer, but they had no idea what they were really doing. They were exposing themselves, exposing their entire operation. Sometimes bad people make mistakes, and good people are there to catch them. The interview went viral. Within days it had been viewed over 1 million times online. Sarah received messages from across the country. Other crime victims reached out, thanking her for giving them hope. Law enforcement officers praised her composure and courage. But the message that mattered most came from an unexpected source. A woman named Patricia wrote to Sarah through the women's shelter. Patricia had been married to one of the men arrested in the larger operation. His arrest had freed her from years of abuse. I was too scared to leave, Patricia wrote. He had money, connections, power, but when the FBI came, when they took him away, I finally felt safe. You helped make that happen. You saved more people than you know. Sarah met Patricia for coffee 3 weeks later. They talked for hours. Patricia had 2 young daughters, was starting over with nothing. Sarah connected her with resources, helped her find a job, introduced her to the support network at the shelter. Frank and the bikers started a fundraiser for Patricia and other families affected by the crime ring's collapse. The motorcycle club organized another charity ride, this time specifically to help crime victims rebuild their lives. They raised $80,000. The federal trial began 6 months after the initial robbery. Sarah testified for 2 days, recounting that night in exact detail. Defense attorneys tried to rattle her, but she stayed calm. She'd practiced with the prosecutors, knew what to expect. The jury convicted all 23 defendants on multiple charges. The ringleaders received sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years. The network was destroyed completely. Rodriguez called Sarah the day the verdicts came in. You did it. They're all going away. Sarah felt a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. It was truly over. The men who'd threatened her, the organization they worked for, all of it was finished. That evening, the diner held a celebration. Not just for Sarah, but for everyone involved. Frank and his crew, Rodriguez and Lisa Chen, George and his family, Patricia and other victims who'd found justice. The diner was packed, filled with laughter and stories. Sarah stood at the counter, looking around at the faces. A year and a half ago, this had been just a job, just a place to earn money while figuring out life. Now it was home. These people were family. George raised a glass. To Sarah, to second chances, to being in the right place at the right time. Everyone cheered. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks but didn't bother wiping them away. Frank approached her later, his weathered face serious. You know what you've done, right? You didn't just survive, you made a difference. Real change. We made a difference, Sarah corrected. I couldn't have done any of it without you. That's how it works, Frank said simply. Nobody does anything alone. We show up for each other. That's what matters. Sarah's college classes were going well. She'd decided to major in criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy. The experience had shown her a path forward, a way to turn trauma into purpose. The self-defense classes at the shelter had expanded to 3 nights a week. Sarah had trained 2 other instructors to help. Dozens of women had passed through the program, learning to protect themselves, building confidence. The diner continued to thrive. George had opened a second location across town, with Sarah managing both as part owner. They'd hired 10 new employees, many of them people who needed second chances. Patricia had become one of Sarah's closest friends. She'd completed a nursing program and found work at the local hospital. Her daughters were thriving in school. The abuse and fear were fading into memory, replaced by hope and possibility. As closing time approached that celebration night, Sarah walked through the diner one more time. She touched the counter where she'd stood, terrified. Looked at the corner booth where 4 bikers had been sitting, where they still sat every Tuesday. She'd been cornered once, thought her life was ending. Instead, it had been a beginning. The thugs hadn't known about the bikers inside. But more than that, they hadn't known about the strength inside Sarah herself. The strength that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge.